In this segment, I'm going to give some tips and explanations on hard modding a PlayStation 2. Before we begin, default disclaimer. You know, piracy and bootlegging is a crime, blah blah blah. You can go to jail, you can go to hell, you can get raped by Satan, big bucktooth, bad breath Bubba in jail. Whatever. Not going to teach you morals here. Don't pirate games. Now, on a serious note, the legality of this. In some countries, in some states, in some places in the universe, buying a mod chip for a PS2 is a crime. So check your local laws and make sure that you're not actually committing a crime just by purchasing one. Now, before you actually buy a PS2, you need to know what version PlayStation 2 you have. You can actually flip your console around, and right here on the back label you're going to have a serial number. That serial number will actually denote what version PlayStation 2 you have, or at least give you a damn good clue. Another way to determine is, in here inside the actual IDE bay, in the hard drive bay, you might have some screws, you might not. You'll also know that notice that some PlayStation 2s actually have more of these little feet for screws than some others do not. So I'll put some links in the show notes on how to actually determine what version PlayStation 2 you have. Now, you need to get the right chip for the right job. Now, back in the early day, one of the things about chips that I really hate is you actually have to go and finger fuck the eject and power button repeatedly to determine which mode you boot into. Now, there are different ways and different modes you can boot into the PS2. You can boot from the memory card, you can boot from the optical drive, and you can boot from the hard drive. If you're going to boot from the optical drive, you got PlayStation 2 mode, you got PlayStation 1 mode, DVD-ROM mode, which would be like DVD movies, and you got CD audio. If you wanted to go ahead and, play a DVD movie, you'd put the disc in, you'd hold the power button for 2 seconds, you'd hit eject for 2 seconds, you put the disc in, you hold eject for 2 seconds, and then you're in DVD mode. Or if you wanted to play a PlayStation 1 game, you'd have to hold the power button, you'd have to hit power on by holding power for 5 seconds and hit eject for 2 seconds, put the disc in, and then put it in, and then if you want to play a PlayStation 2 game, you have to go and hit the eject button for 6 seconds, and then hit the eject button for 4 seconds, you have to face 42 degrees north-northwest and masturbate in your 40th trimester with a silver spoon sticking out of your ass. It was a major league pain. When you get a chip, make sure you get something that has automatic boot detection. It'll automatically determine whether you have code on the memory card, the hard drive, or the optical drive, and boot from it accordingly. Very, very useful. The second thing you want to look for is make sure your chip actually has onboard storage for configuration. A lot of chips nowadays, even the low-end ones, have it so you can actually tweak out and say, okay, I only want to boot my homebrew from the memory card, I only want to boot it from the optical, I only want to boot from the hard drive, and it'll give you a whole bunch of really nice options. One of the options, if you're going to boot from hard drive, to look for is ATA patching. Sony was kind of douchebags when it came to letting you use whatever hard drives that you wanted in your PlayStation 2, so you could only use the Sony-branded PS2 hard drives. With ATA patching, you can use whatever hard drive you want as long as it fits inside the case. You also want to make sure that your chip will have sleep mode, because sometimes you could be playing an original game that'll detect your chip and erase it. Or, for whatever reason, you're running some homebrew and you're testing some code and you did something so horribly wrong that it completely wiped out your chip. You want to make it so that the chip will either go to sleep or protect itself that it cannot be rewritten to. It'll only rewrite the configuration. So it's kind of like formatting your computer, the enema of the electronic world. It's a pain in the ass, no one wants to go through it, but once it's done, everything is just so much better, even though you want it to or not. So, there's actually a lot of features to look for in a chip. Some of the more professional chips, I'd like to call, or the ones tailored for homebrew, will actually allow you to put your executable files on the chip itself. So you don't need a memory card, you don't need a DVD-ROM or your CD, and you don't need a hard drive. You can boot directly from the chip, and then from there, continue on with your development. Those are actually pretty cool. I would highly recommend the DMS version 4, or the DMS4 mod chip, or the DMS3 if you really want to get into homebrew. But if you really just want to go and follow the homebrew scene and just, pick up burn a homebrew disk and put it in and get it to run, anything that'll boot from typical media without having any like really major league pushing buttons, fiddling wires, and all that crap. Just get a chip that'll boot your media and possibly do ATA drive support. Those are actually the two important features. Okay, so you figured out what version PlayStation 2 you have, you picked out a chip that you want. I'm going to go to the table side and I'll install a chip, and I'll give you some really great pointers to installing a chip. And hell, even if you're not installing a chip and you like to solder stuff, this is actually good to watch. Here we have a version 7 PlayStation 2. Here's the mod chip. The first thing you want to do once you take your PlayStation apart, while taking your PlayStation apart, be really careful for any ribbon cables that might plug into any of the sides. Those ribbon cables are very easy to damage, and the #1 problem with any PlayStation 2 is that the ribbon cable that plugs into the front panel eject and power will tear or break. That usually plugs into here or over here, depending on which version you have. Now, I've disassembled everything and I've tried to position my camera. I'm going to have to zoom in a little bit. Here's the chip. Usually the chip will make a home around here somewhere. There's usually a little hole in the board. Really, depending on the chip and the make and the model of your PlayStation, the make and the model of your chip, and your soldering capabilities will determine where it goes. So in my case, I'm going to put this here. Now there are a whole lot of really small surface mount stuff that you're going to have to solder onto. Would highly recommend some kind of locking forceps. These are called hemostats with a nice angled tip on them. 30 gauge or thinner wire. Solder, of course. Desoldering braid. But if you're going to use this, chances are that you've just destroyed your PlayStation 2. I'm very fond of the term, if you want a job done right, do it yourself. If you do not feel comfortable with your soldering capabilities, I would strongly recommend you do not try this. This is one of the hardest things I've ever had to mod. I've got a lot of soldering experience. I'm not overplaying my skills here. This is very, very, very difficult. I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to start getting to work. I don't know how much of the footage will be usable, but I'll salvage whatever I can. When dealing with the voltage supply leads, don't use 30 gauge Kynar wire, use something like 20, 22, or 26 gauge. Reason being is these tiny thin little wires aren't going to be able to carry the appropriate current and voltage to the chip. So go ahead and use some slightly thicker wire. Also, if you've noticed, I've been pre-tinning all of my wires. I've been getting a nice shiny coat of solder on it, and then I've, right afterwards, cleaned my tip off on a wet sponge or a wet paper towel or something. The Reason being is you do not want an excessive amount of solder on such very small surface mount components. Remember, solder will flow to other points of bare copper and solder. So if you have an excessive amount of solder on your tip, like here's my tip, if you notice it's just nice and shiny silver, very sharp as well. If you have an excessive amount of solder on the tip, it's going to flow and cross pads and leads. This stuff is too small to use desoldering braid. You can't tell, but over here we got to solder some wires that lead into the BIOS. I have pre-tinned these pads. Be very, very careful. Do not use an excessive amount of heat. A 35-watt soldering iron for too long on these pads will cause heat damage. They will peel up and you will be absurdly fucked. Remember, when dealing with wire, solid wire retains its shape. So there's no reason you have to go and get your hands in really awkward, let me see if I can get on frame a little bit better. No reason you have to go and get into really insanely awkward positions. So you can go ahead and bend your wire or your lead so you can get into a position that's a little easier for your hands, especially for someone who's like me, who's got very big clumsy hands. Get into place and solder. And remember, solder sticks to solder, so pre-tin your wire, pre-tin your pad. If it's not a solder point, like in a few seconds I got to solder to the actual legs of this BIOS chip, and because those already have solder on it, it already sticks. But if you notice that, like I said, I pre-tinned this pad, and now it's sticking pretty well. Whenever you have wires, you see these big chips. Whenever you're routing the wires, do not route them over the chips. Route them around and through components. Try to group the wires together. I'll show you in a little bit. But you remember the electronic stethoscope segment where I explained that when you pass electrons and voltage through the microprocessors and different chips, it creates an electromagnetic field? Well, these wires will actually pick up all of that interference, and it will have a negative impact on the function of your mod chip. And you only want to have to solder these wires once. So, when you're routing all your wires to your mod chip, make sure that they're not passing over anything. Every once in a while, it's okay to take a hot glue gun to hot glue your wires down, or even just some electrical tape, just to make sure your wires are in place and they don't move around too much. I know some people that actually go even further than that. Once all of this is done, they'll actually take some clear epoxy putty, or some clear epoxy, and they'll actually put it over all of their solder points, just so nothing can go wrong and these wires can't pull off. If these wires pull off, they're going to pull the traces with them, they're going to pull the pads with them, and possibly even components, destroying your PlayStation 2. There you go. Like I said, these pads are already pre-tinned. They got a small amount of solder on there, so the wire sticks really, really quick, really easy. Whenever you're soldering pins that are very close together, it's good to have what I call a low angle of attack. Instead of coming straight down on top of your components with your iron, come in as low and as flat as possible. That way, it doesn't obstruct your view, and you can get as flat down to the board as possible. Just like so. I've been stripping the wires a little bit long, pretty much just using my teeth, and then I'll tin it, and then using a regular pair of angle cutters, diagonal cutters, or even a pair of toenail clippers. Clip off as much of the excess tinned soldered wire as possible. I've also been cutting these wires excessively long. That way I know that they'll route to the mod chip, because you can't cut a wire to become longer. I don't know how well you can see this, but I've actually sharply angled the tinned wire at close to 90-degree angles. Reason being is this is going to wrap around the top of the chip. Now I know I said to not do this. This is a risk you'll have to take, and in my experience of modding PlayStation 2s, mounting the wires like this really isn't much of a big deal. Especially for this chip, I only need 4 small little wires. But you can also use this method to come behind the chip like that, flat behind it. So it's up to you on what you're more comfortable. If you're more of a novice or intermediate skilled solderist, whatever the hell someone who solders is called, you might find it a whole hell of a lot easier coming from the top of the chip like this, trying to match the angle of the pin. Let me see if I can get on frame. You have no idea how hard this is. Trying to get this small little stuff so closely zoomed in on frame. Just like so. Also, when you're soldering such small surface mount components, especially when it's chips and such, remember, you always have to remember that excessive amounts of heat will damage components. So if you've noticed, I've been keeping my finger on the wires, on the chip itself. If my finger is burning, then this chip is burning. It's always a good idea, after you're doing like rows of soldering like this, to go in and visually inspect. If you suspect something is crossing, do it again. If any of these wires cross, or any of the wrong wires cross, you will destroy your PlayStation 2. I have known people to miswire this chip and quite literally blow holes into it. Really, this is difficult. You've really been forewarned. If you're not comfortable with this such small scale stuff, either soft mod or don't mod at all. Did I ever mention how much I hate modding the PS2? No? A lot. More than a lot. Excessively more than a lot. There we go. Finally. Alright, just got a couple more to go. Then we can start hooking them into the chip itself. Oh, Christ almighty, this just never ends. Every once in a while you're going to have to solder onto these really small circular points. These things are called vias. They're just points that lead to the other side of the board. They're next to impossible to solder onto because they're not bare copper. Albeit they look like they're bare copper, they're not. Now in this instance for my revision PlayStation 2, I don't have to solder onto any of these. I'm very lucky. But I'm sure a lot of you will have to solder onto groupings of the vias. Let me see. Like, you know, groupings like these, or especially like over here. It's very small and really hard to solder onto. So this is the smallest eyeglass screwdriver that I have, and you can see that these points are already a tenth the size of this eyeglass screwdriver. You need to scrape off a clear coating of lacquer, and to do this I usually use a sewing needle inside of a hobby knife body. If you don't have one, you can also use a safety pin. Just straighten it out a bit and use the body of the safety pin as a handle and just slightly scratch away until you start to see nice, fresh, bare copper. Don't gouge into it really hard, just very lightly with just the body of the pick, scratch away into it. Now I've got one more point that needs to get done, and as you can see, it's not tinned. So I will show you the process of that I use to go ahead and tin those. It's just a matter of putting a little bit of heat and a little bit of solder, and it's tinned. We're going to take our last wire, we're going to place it on that tinned pad, and this should be the last wire on this PlayStation 2 that needs to be soldered. Now it's just a matter of going down to the chip side and soldering everything to the chip. The chip is just loosely laying on top of where I'd like it to be, and the optical drive actually fits in this area over here. With this explicit chip, there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, blah, blah, blah. It's all lettered. So now it's just a matter of pre-tinning the necessary pads, cutting all of these loose wires to size, stripping them, tinning them, and soldering them. So I think I've bored you enough with the process of soldering. I'm just going to go ahead and get to this and cut to the final product. Okay, so we got the mod chip in place. Make sure none of the wires are crossing any of the very large chips, which can cause interference. Made sure that there are no short circuits on the BIOS chip. No short circuits on the BIOS chip on this side either. Made sure that all of our solder points on the surface mount components are nice and solid and they're not crossing with anything. Made sure that we didn't rip off any solder surface mount components. The only thing you have to do now is to put the unit back together, but I would highly recommend using some electrical tape on various areas just to make sure that that when you put the case back together that there are no metal points on the shielding that'll accidentally contact with the chip especially and the BIOS itself. I've known people that have damaged their PlayStation 2s because they didn't realize that some of the small fins on the shielding accidentally touched their chip and it shorted out the chip in the PS2. So I'm going to go ahead and just put some electrical tape around everything, try to keep the wires down so they don't float around too much, and proceed to put the PlayStation 2 back together. Well, for those of you who actually give a crap, this is what it looks like after some electrical tape. Not the prettiest, but it's insulating. Like I said, you can also use putty epoxy, but if there's any reason that you need to redo any of this, you're pretty much screwed with putty epoxy, or any kind of epoxy for that matter. But nice and insulated. I'm going to go and throw the PlayStation 2 back together, and I'm going to test to see if it actually works. Okay, so it was about an hour. We've got the PlayStation 2 back together. I've got a copy of PlayStation 2 OS here, and I'm going to go ahead and throw this inside the PlayStation 2 and see if this is going to work. Now, I would highly recommend at this point that you get a copy of an original PlayStation 1, an original PlayStation 2, an original DVD movie, original CD audio games and titles, and test them. And also copies. But I'm not condoning piracy, so I'm not going to go and show booting up PlayStation 1 and 2 games. So, PS2 OS is loading up, and PS2 OS will allow us to boot our own homebrew code from the hard drive, which unfortunately I don't have installed, so it's going to complain about that. Now, I could also boot code from my memory card slot if I had that installed, but unfortunately I'm out of time. I spent all of the time for this segment showing you tips and advice on soldering the mod chip itself. So, hit the show notes. They're on the forums as always. You can always go on IRC. I'd be more than willing to help anyone out when it comes to finding some cool homebrew to run. You got typical media players, media centers, you've got emulators of sorts, homebrew games, you've got utilities like hard drive utilities and such that allow you to copy your games to hard drive or dump CDs and things of the such. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff, so now that you got your system chipped, go ahead and see what kind of fun stuff you can do with it.
Well, here I am at my local bank, and I discovered something last night. As you see, the door to get into the ATM is locked because it's after hours. And everybody feels secure that you have to have your bank ATM card to get into the door, and it logs who you are and you're on camera and everything. And they give you kind of a false sense of security here, thinking that you're safe. Here I have an MTA card from the New York subway. Now, I'm just using this for example. Anything with a magnetic strip will do. This card reader here in the door actually isn't a card reader, it's just a magnetic sensor. As you see, I stick my subway card in, and now the door opens up and lets anybody in. No identification, can't prove who you are, or what you're there for, or whatever. I'm not doing this video so that you can learn how to go and jack people from the ATM. This is for security reasons, so you know and you don't feel secure behind this locked door here. You're better off going to one of the drive-up ATMs if you have a card. That way, if somebody comes, they try and gank you for your money or whatever, you can either take off and not get shot or killed, or better yet, throw the car in gear and run them the fuck over. I mean, they're trying to take your money. Why not, right? You don't have to have an ATM card or Metro card anything will do, a health insurance card, Sam's Club membership, any card that has one of these magnetic strips. You probably, if you could get a thin enough magnet, you probably could just stick a magnet in here and that'll let you in. You know what? Let me try something. Let me see if a card that doesn't have a magnetic strip works. No, it does detect magnets, so you can't just use a piece of paper. But anything magnetic will work. So I hope this informs you to be safer when you go to the bank, and I hope you enjoy this segment.
Hey everybody, I'm Dortz, and this is the BSoD C++ tutorial on classes. There's a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right into it. So, this is a makefile. Make is a Unix utility, and that basically will run shell commands for you. And it's really useful when you're developing programs and stuff because of these makefiles. It's going to let us lay out certain specific rules and dependency lists and everything that we are going to need to properly set up a program so that we don't have to recompile everything from scratch each time we do it. I mean, think if this were a major program, like 10,000 files, millions of lines of code. We do not want to have to recompile that every single time. This is where make comes in. It's going to detect which of the dependency files in each of these output files have been changed. Then only compile those output files and then relink the executable. I said a word that nobody understands yet. Linking. Now that's simply where the compiler is going to grab the precompiled bits of the program, these output files, and link them together. And it's going to build it into its single executable. You can do this, outside of a makefile. You can do it however you want, really, but it's really ugly. And this presents things in a much more simple and concise manner, and frankly a lot easier this way than having to do it without make. So, two major types of lines: dependency lines and action lines. A dependency line contains two parts: a target and the target's dependencies. These are the source files. If any one of these files is changed, make goes ahead and rebuilds the target using the directions in the action line, which hold all the rules that were declared up here, and you can see the different syntax that it's used. We have rules and then any further options that we would need for it. Like, we have the options, and then we also, of course, include, for an output file, we have which compiler to use, the options to use with it, including -c, and main.cpp for main.o, which is this file that's actually going to be compiled by G++ in this case, because that's the compiler we're using. So, one more note for makefiles is clean here. This is generally included with all makefiles because, bugs happen. And say you find yourself in a makefile that it's gone and lost and cannot detect any changes in your files anymore. So you just go ahead and make clean, and it's going to delete all the files, and when the next time you remake it, it's going to build from scratch. So, let's head on over to apartment.h and get our first taste of classes. So, here we are with apartment.h, a header file, as opposed to .cpp, a CPP file. Generally, classes and everything are in header files, which is simply just the class declaration and a .cpp file of the same name over here. which this is all the implementation of the member functions. So, what is a class? A user-defined type. Now you can use them just as if they were going to be a regular variable, except they can do so much more. Like, I would have a group of, different variables, which I in fact do, and I can do almost anything with them using a class, depending on which functions and everything I have implemented. But before jumping into syntax, these guys are preprocessor directives. Using these simply avoids double inclusion. Now, compilers are good at optimization as it is, but this prevents multiple copies of apartment.h from being compiled. Because each time you're going to do it, you're going to define a apartment h, I guess you'd call it an object, and it's going to check if it's already there. If it's not, it's going to skip all this up until the end if there. So it's good to just help keep things cleaner. So the actual syntax of how to declare a class is simply class, class name, open bracket, members of the class, close bracket, semicolon. So first thing we see in the class is public. This is a keyword, obviously. Now there are 3 different types of security levels in a class. It's public, protected, and private. Public is basically like the front end of the class, usable by everybody. Protected, which I didn't show because I don't need it, is usable by any derived subclass of our class. So, like, okay, if I had a board game class, and you want to make a subclass of a board game called chess, chess will be able to use any protected members that I have listed. So, listing members is just under each keyword. After that, there's public or private. So, first actual code here is a constructor. Now, constructors are declared without type because, well, that's the easiest way to equate them, is that it is a type. This is called when you create an apartment object, it's going to call one of these constructors. You can't overload constructors because here we have one that will set default values, and we're going to use this one specifically for creating pointers to an apartment object, because obviously we don't want to have to build in default values each time. We're just going to create a pointer to an already existing object. Here we have the second constructor, which is going to take default values. Now there are a couple other ones that we could implement here. A copy constructor and a destructor, which I have done in the other class I'm going to show you. So I will describe what they do later. But first, some standard member functions. Now, I don't remember if I ever covered it, but constant. That's all it means. So anything that it's going to, that is before the keyword, is not going to be changed. So here we have constant function. Nothing within the function is going to be changed. So this guarantees that I'm not doing anything except printing info here. Not doing anything except sending back a number here. Very important point, which I didn't actually make up here but should have, when dealing with strings, specifically when passing strings. A reference to a constant string needs to be used, because strings are dynamic just by definition. So therefore you can't screw with them. So they have to be passed as a constant. And now we have, those with all the public members. Most of them, I could put these there too, but that would entirely defeat the purpose of using it as a class. That would be using it as a struct. The difference between a struct and a class is you can define in a class the protections on certain things. What the user can use, what the user can mess with. If it was just a struct, I wouldn't be able to protect any of my values. So, again, no implementation here. So jumping over to apartment.cpp here, and we see we have our header file that is included here. That's going to just take all the class declaration, everything, and put it in here. A quick note on this. Remember the using namespace std we've always had. This tells the compiler that unless specified, scope to std. So std is just an all-encompassing any class that is covered by the STL, the standard template library. When you use your own class, you need to tell the compiler where these functions are implemented. That's called scoping. So again, why would I even bother? Why does this even exist? Because say you're a happy little user and you want to make a print info file. A print info function, I mean. So you're going to go in there, you'll be so, okay, print info and blah, blah, blah. But I've already got one in apartment. So if you include apartment and there's a print info there, your print info is going to get confused with my print info. And it just wouldn't work. So therefore, I scope my print info to my apartment class using this scope operator. And you'll see how that works out in just a second, right here. So our basic constructor, see how it is apartment scoped to apartment. So this is what is called when you declare a apartment object. Declaring an object is simply like declaring a variable. So this is all this is going to do is set it to default values. And this is what we would call, if we were going to dynamically allocate one, or create a pointer to one, this is what is set aside so that it knows, okay, we're going to head on over to there. We're going to point to an apartment object, so we know that we have to have a tenant and a number set aside, a string and a number set aside that we can use in the future should we need to. So this, however, has a second constructor, which is a bit more useful for regular usage, which takes a string and a number that will be just, instead of the default values of nothing and -1, it'll be those. Notice here, for each of these constructors, we haven't had to declare anything because they are already declared over an apartment age. They're declared in the class definition, therefore any members of the class can use them. So here's our 3 other member functions from earlier. I could go into detail, but I am not going to, mainly because I'm out of time, and I've still got another class to go over, which is far more interesting. So let's move on to building.h and show the full power of the big 3. Okay, and here is our second class, building, in the header file for it. Note we have everything basically set up the same way as apartment. We've also included apartment because it's an apartment building that we're making. So we have a couple of constructors here. The standard constructor, which is going to take an integer that's going to see just how many apartments are going to be in the building. But we also have a couple other things included. The copy constructor and the destructor. Together, they make the big 3. If you have not implemented any one of these, the constructor will do this for you when you compile it. So I haven't done it in apartment.h. You only have the two regular constructors. So if later in, and I will do this, if later on I go ahead and I try and make a copy of apartment.h, well, an apartment object, onto a new apartment object, it will take care of that for me. And I can do that specifically because I don't have any of this in there. Dynamic memory. This is the whole reason why you have to implement it yourself and manage your own. Because, like we said before, dynamic memory is managed by the user, not by the system. So, copy constructor. Why would we need a copy constructor first? Because if I am making a bitwise copy of an object onto a new object, and that object has pointers to dynamic memory, which we do, the new object is going to point to the same location in dynamic memory. So if the original object is deleted, that dynamic memory goes bye-bye, and our new object still points to the dynamic memory, which is now garbage. We're in a memory leak, so we need to avoid it. The destructor. Now, this is the favorite of mine out of the big three. So, this is generally called only on its own. You don't have to actually call this ever. You will never directly call it. Note the syntax, the tilde, and it's just tilde, class name, parentheses. So generally it's going to call when the program's exit, but say I have a dynamically allocated building object, it'll go ahead and destroy it. It'll call the destructor when I try and delete that object. So, then I have several regular functions for playing with the private members. And note I have a reference to a apartment object. So that can be fun later. Well, we'll see how fun that is now. Jumping over to building.cpp. So, now that we're working with dynamic memory, we have to be rather careful in how it's implemented. So, for my apartments, remember this is a dynamically allocated array of pointers to apartment objects. I know it's really heavy statement, but when you think about it simply, you're making a array. This is a pointer to it that is going to be a dynamically allocated array of whatever size we want, and each element of the array is going to point to a different apartment object. So when we make a default one, which is our standard constructor, it'll be of size X. We build the array and then fill it all with null. So we know where everything's going. It's not garbage. So the copy constructor, a little more entertaining. See how we pass copy object. Now, objects of the same class can access each other's members directly. Therefore, copy object dot mySize is going to be able to assign right over to mySize. And the same way for here, we declare our new array, same way up there. And then for the for loop, each single member of the original myObjects is checked. If it's null, we just set ours to null. If it's not, we have to make a new apartment object, and here is where the magic happens. we are calling the copy constructor of apartment, which we did not allocate or did not declare at all in apartment. The constructor is going to do it itself. It's going to take this dereferenced apartment object and just do a straight bitwise copy of it over into here. It's that simple. So we have our very loaded array of dynamic objects, and now we have to get rid of it. Deleting that is simple. Is a for loop each time for each part of the index of my apartments. We have to deallocate any memory that's there, and then we can delete my apartments. It is an array of dynamic memory. So all the memory that's allocated by the dynamic memory by the pointers that are dynamically allocated need to be deleted. It seems so crazy to say it out like that, but when you look at it, okay, delete everything in the array, then delete the array. Easy. Let's see, one thing I wanted to point out is, yes, here we have our object of apartment, and how do we set in our new add apartment is the same way as before. We reference our past apartment number and call the existent / non-existent copy constructor for apartment. And it should be about it. Most of this other stuff is pretty simple. Yeah. So let's make one last note before I jump over to the compiler end. This is just a main that I wrote up. You can browse it later if you really care. I have building my building. What this is going to do is create a building object called my building of size 4. See how we pass parameters the same way you would with a function into a new object. So what this is going to do is immediately it's going to call the basic constructor of just an integer for my building, well, for the building class, and make my building. And then we can reference all the members of the public end of the class using the dot operator. So my building dot print all will call the print all function for the building class. And I use several instances of creating new apartments and adding them and messing with them and removing them. But you can really get a feel for how these functions work within the class. So let's jump over the compiler end and make sure our make works. Okay, so here is our compiler side of things. Notice we have all of the files from our demonstration in here, especially including the make file, and it just does everything for us basically. It's gone and built our executable, done all the linking and everything for us. So there we go. Now if I wanted to make it again, it's going to check all these files and notice, okay, I didn't change any of that, so it's up to date. It's all good. So if I wanted to just fully remake it, I would just do make clean, which would get rid of all of the files and remake it, and there it goes. So that's your tutorial on basics of classes and Makefile. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, again, hit me up on IRC or the forums. This will all be up on the show notes. It'll probably just be in a big pack, because I don't even want to think how messy it would look having to put all of these files up individually. So Good luck, happy hacking. Later, guys.
Here's a close-up of my original compact collinear. This uses a 4-hole panel mount end connector on a 3/4 inch PVC pipe end cap. The pipe opens up and you can see the actual innards of the antenna. It is nothing more than a length of, I believe, 14 gauge copper wire. This is half wavelength down here from the base to the first coil. Yep, from the base to the first coil right here. Then this is 3/4 wavelength, and this is slightly less than 3/4 wavelength. The actual calculations aren't too imperative. This is a very forgiving antenna, so it really doesn't matter if you're off. Just try not to be off more than like a millimeter or two. I know that's a little crazy, but you know, you're dealing with very high frequencies, so you know, it's not as forgiving as the lower frequencies. Now, as for parts, like I've stated, we have a typical 4-panel mount end jack. I'm not too fond of these, to tell you the truth. I don't like how it mounted to the pipe, so instead today we're going to be using a bulkhead panel mount. As you can see, the difference is that there's this nut on the outside right here, and then that just kind of screws on, nut and bolt style, and that's actually going to be affixed to the bottom of a 1/4 inch diameter, because it just so happens that the coils in the compact collinear are exactly the outer diameter of a 1/4 inch piece of PVC plumbing pipe right here. Now, as for a wire, regular copper wire, doesn't matter. You can get really thin stuff, it doesn't matter. Wi-Fi is relatively low power, so it's only about at maximum 300 milliwatts, but most adapters really operate closer to 150. Typical tools, we got a couple of pliers, we got some solder desoldering braid, got some wire, got some cutters, got a soldering gun in this case because I'm using such thick wire. You can still use a soldering iron. You need a marker, ruler, metric, of course. That's about it when it comes to tools and supplies. Now, I actually got this socket bit. The reason for the socket bit is it actually has a 10mm outer diameter. I've actually taken my my metric ruler and verified that it is roughly 10. Oh, no, it's inch. It's roughly 10 millimeters. That way, we can use this to actually wrap our wire around to get really nice, solid, smooth, round coils. You don't have to use a socket bit. Just go find something in your house that has 10mm outer diameter. I'm sure maybe a marker would work. I've never actually measured, but it looks almost right. You might actually be able to use a marker, a pencil. I'm sure you've got something. So, we're going to take our black Sharpie marker, and we are going to measure the half wavelength, which is about 61 millimeters. So wait a minute. That's right about there. And then, using our pliers and our socket bit, we're going to try to bend this around as closely as possible. There we go. Bent around. There we go. Nice, even bend. Try to tighten it up a little bit. If your measurements aren't exact, don't worry about it. Try to keep the coil nice and straight, and then we're going to actually measure off 91.5 millimeters from this point on this point. Now, if you notice, my wire is a little bent because it's literally scrapped out of my lab garbage can. It's really not a big deal. Just try to get it relatively straight. So, okay, so from this point on, we're going to measure 91.5 millimeters, and we're going to put another coil, keeping in mind, keep the coils in the same direction. Make sure they're either twisting clockwise or counterclockwise. Don't have them oppose each other. That could actually cause problems in the long run. I've got both of the coils put in place, and I've marked off almost 85 millimeters, between 83 and 85 mil. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to cut this scrap off right here. And this is the meat of our antenna. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take some needle nose pliers, and we are going to bend the appropriate length downward. I got one here. Try to get these as sharp as possible. If you can't, no big deal. There we go. Try to sneak this under here. Give a nice sharp twist up. And there's our first coil. Of course, yeah, it's a little bent, but you can go in afterwards and try to get it nice and smooth. Go into the second one, do the same. There we go. Got both of the coils placed. This is going to be the top end, this is going to be the bottom end. And that's the meat of the antenna. Now, I've actually noticed that when it comes to this connector, there's a problem. With the panel mount end, I'll try to get this nice and close up so you can see, this actually fits in nicely. Like the actual diameter fits in. This is actually, it pushes in. With this connector, however, this actually has a thinner diameter solder cup. So this is going to be soldered, but it's not going to push in. So measure this over here and make sure that the final length after you solder it isn't off measurement. Because, like I said, with the previous one, this actually pushes in. Let me see if I can get nice and close for you. It pushes in all the way to the bottom, but for this one, it's going to be resting on the top. So it's actually going to throw this off about 3 millimeters. So I have to cut this down about 3 millimeters. Now I'm going to go ahead and readjust my camera, and so we can go and get some footage of the desk vise and some soldering. My soldering gun decided to be camera shy today, and it's become nothing more than a mildly searing butt plug. So I'm going to opt out for a typical soldering iron, the average 30 watt soldering iron. Here's a close-up of the coils. As you can see, they're nice and uniform, straight with each other. Whatever. Our end connector. Now this is going to fit in just like so. I'm going to solder it on, but before we do that, we're going to take the actual nut that goes to the connector. We're going to place this on like so. That way, we're going to take the actual cap of the PVC, and we're going to put that on like so as well. That way, when we solder this on, we can feed this right back up into the cap and then bolt it all on. Now, be careful because there's some polyethylene or polystyrene or some kind of plastic inside here, some kind of nylon plastic that's actually inside the end connector itself. It really doesn't get along too well with excessive amounts of heat, so try not to get it too hot for too long. We're just going to fill the solder cup with a liberal amount of solder, and I'm going to pre-tin the actual, I'm going to try to on camera. This isn't easy for me. There we go. I'm just going to go ahead and pre-tin this. Get a nice little coat of solder on it because solder sticks well to itself. Then we're just going to take the two of these. We're going to butt them up together. And we're going to force them to join. There we go. And as you can see, the antenna's nicely affixed. I'm going to wait for the wire to cool down a little bit, and we'll assemble the rest of this. That's cool enough. Alright, so I've already drilled a hole. I don't think I have to teach you how to use a drill. You should already know how to do that. We've insert like so, and now it's just a matter of taking some needle nose pliers or something of the such. We got some needle nose pliers. We're going to get that nut into place, or try to. There we go, and then we're just going to twist this on a couple of times. There we go. That's nice and twisted on, nice and sturdy and stable. Gonna do some last minute, adjustments. Looks nice and straight to me. Slip this into the pipe, and there we go. Compact linear. There we go. We've gone ahead and built a compact collinear. I left the tube a little long because I really don't care to cut it the right size. I really should have cut it about here, but really shouldn't make any impact on the antenna itself. Now I've got NetStumbler running and I'm looking at an access point, and I've got the built-in rubber duck antenna. I'm going to go ahead and swap out the rubber duck antenna, and we're going to see what kind of performance gain this compact collinear gives us. So I'm going to go duck behind the computer and swap this out. Let this go for a couple of seconds. You'll notice that the access point signal strength has dropped considerably. Now the reason I'm using the actual PC rather than my laptop is I noticed that PCI Wi-Fi cards actually have faster and more accurate signal performance for some reason. I don't know why. There we go. I'll give this a couple of seconds to tune in and see how well it does. If you've already noticed, we're actually picking up way more. I think we've picked up like 3 or 4 or 5 more access points themselves. And we've also got a really nice, thick, steady signal strength. So the antenna is working. A note about the coils themselves. They're trying to get the gap between the coils as close together as possible. Make sure they're not too far apart. That will actually affect the gain as well. Yeah, it seems to be working. I mean, it's giving us a bit more performance. It's probably giving us about like 6 decibel gain, 5 decibel gain above a stock rubber duck. So there you go, compact collinear antennas. Definitely worth war driving with.